Good afternoon. Welcome to the West Virginia edition of our state webinars series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel. That then allows you to type in your question or your comment. And we will allow plenty of time for Q&A during and after the presentation. We are recording this webinar and will send the link to everyone who has registered. Please feel free to share the recording with others. So with that, let me introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin. I am American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is our Senior Director for External Relations and is based in Kentucky. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a very quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We work to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from farmland protection projects to soil health initiatives, to land access training, to state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So let me now turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including the West Virginia Agricultural Land Protection Authority, several county farmland protection boards, the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, the Cacopon and Lost Rivers Land Trust, Save Our Soil Task Force, and USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We would like to recognize and thank NRCS, especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They have been an integral partner and has been our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners. So a big thanks to NRCS and Conservation Science Partners.
I'm sorry, have I been on mute this entire time? My apologies if I was. So I think I need to back up and say, let's talk about the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today, we're focusing on the State of the States, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch event last month, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, this was the period that we looked at, a period of historically low housing starts. The U.S. still converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. And lastly, more than 1/3 of the land that was converted, about 4.5 million acres, was what we have identified as nationally significant land. This is land best suited for intensive food and crop production. So as you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the US and no longer confined to large metropolitan areas. Small cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts have created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state, West Virginia included. So now we're going to dive into the findings for West Virginia, and we're going to do this by going to the new interactive website. We do this in part so that you can see what the tools are available for you, because we hope that this will be a very useful tool to people around the country who are focused on farm and ranch land, not just protection, but retention as well. Billy and I will be assisted in this dive into the website by our colleague, Beth Fraser, who is our talented website navigator. So let's start with pointing out the Reports and Data tab over here on the right. This is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe the methodology for many of the pieces of this report. And if you're interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, you go to this geospatial data layers where Beth has put the cursor. That will take you to a form that you can fill out and request access to the data. And I believe we will be responding and beginning to provide the data information to folks starting in July. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and choose West Virginia. And here you will see that you can do both spatial mapping and the policy scorecard. Beth, can you take a minute first to point out the West Virginia conversion summary? So in this interactive website, you'll see that there are these 2-page downloadable PDFs. We hope that these will be particularly helpful because they have a bunch of infographics. They have useful little tidbits of information. They have the most compelling, we think, information on both the spatial side and the policy side. And you can use them for a variety of audiences. You can put them in newsletters. You can give them to policymakers. You can give them to reporters. Anyway, they have many uses, and we hope you will find them helpful. So if we can go back now, and we're going to start with land cover and use. Farms Under Threat, the State of the States, uses multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development. It also includes a first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a ranch or a farm. So our mapping shows 2.8 million acres of agricultural land in West Virginia, including 539,000 acres of cropland, 963,000 acres of pasture land, and 1.3 million acres of woodland that again is associated with a farm or a ranch. So let's go to PBR values next. For Farms Under Threat, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of the National Panel of Experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map that you see here shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker green indicates a higher PVR value, and the higher the PVR value, the higher the suitability of the land for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. So turning now to the nationally significant data layer. We used the PVR values to identify nationally significant land. And this shows the nationally significant land in West Virginia. You'll see that 583, almost 584,000 acres of agricultural land falls into this category, or about 21% of the state's agricultural land. About 355,000 acres of this are cropland, with the rest split pretty evenly between pasture and woodland. The loss of this highly productive land has both economic and environmental implications. When nationally significant land is impacted by development, intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands where input costs are typically higher, crop yields are typically lower, and soils degrade more quickly. So let's go now to the conversion data layer. This data looks at a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016. Again, a period of historically low housing starts with a deep recession in the midst of it. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land use. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas. Urban and highly developed land use is largely found in cities and towns, but this category also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well pads and solar panel installations. The second type is low density residential development, or LDR, as we have labeled it. This is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. You can see that the vast majority of conversion, 75,200 acres, or 84% of all of the land converted over this time frame, was to LDR. This doesn't mean that there is no active agriculture on land designated as LDR. There may well be, and some of that agricultural production may be productive. We know that small farm parcels can be highly productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in West Virginia that was considered LDR in 2001 was 6 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who have to deal with farming in and around non-farm neighbors. I note here just that the large amount of LDR conversion in West Virginia seems to be responsible for the fact that the state developed over 4 acres per person added to the state's population between 1982 and 2012. That's more than any other state except North Dakota. So total agricultural land converted over this 15-year period was a little over 89,000 acres. Woodland conversion accounted for about 36,000 of that, followed by pasture land, followed by cropland. And this conversion happened during a time period when West Virginia lost population. In looking at the PVR values of the land converted, more than half of the conversion, about 54,000 acres, occurred on land that is in the top half of those PVR values, so land that is more suited for intensive food and crop production. This is not surprising, given that this well-drained, mostly flat land is also the easiest to develop, but it points to the need to focus on ways to reduce the footprint of development on this land especially. And with that, let me turn it over to Billy, who has been looking at the map and thinking about conversion and what he's seeing, and to offer his perspectives.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just call the viewers' attention to the gray areas, the urbanized areas, and really focus in on those in the relationship to the red areas. And as you can see, these red areas are really proliferating across the entire state. The low density residential, those areas that are threatened for urbanization. I think it's important to note that low density residential is a transition to urbanization. So if you look across the map of West Virginia, and this phenomenon is not unique to West Virginia, we're seeing this in other states across the nation, where there's so much low density residential development or development that is in a phase of urbanization, that smaller communities begin to merge into larger communities or into small cities. So this is what we're seeing. If you look in the northeastern part of the state, you can see a proliferation of low density residential development and urbanization, and you're surrounded by PVR land there, your best soils. And then across the state generally, you see PVR land across the entire state of West Virginia. And when we were looking at the map earlier, we're looking at the darkest PVR land now, but we were looking at the PVR map earlier, you could see a real range in PVR values. So it's not to say, so this map says a lot. Maybe if we could go back, Beth, to the last map you were on. Yes, perfect. So you can see the shading of green. So if we scroll down and look at the whole state, there's a significant amount of PVR land in West Virginia of varying values along that range, from high PVR value to low PVR value. But if we go back and we look at the urbanization that's taking place with, if we could see the low density residential, please, Beth, you can see that that land is under threat. That land is under significant threat. And so now is the time to act, because your more urban areas and your low density residential areas are surrounded by your PVR lands. Those are your best soils.
Great. Thank you, Billy, and thank you, Beth. So we are going to turn to policy, but before we do, we're going to launch a poll, and this poll is intended to get us all to think about what we think will be the conversion drivers in West Virginia over the next 10 to 20 years. Because when we start to think about policy and what types of policy responses are needed, it is dictated in part by what we think the primary drivers of loss of land are going to be. So feel free to vote. You can vote for more than one. If you're having trouble with voting, it might be that you're in full screen mode and you need to come out of that in order to vote. But we'll take a minute for people to read this and vote. And I think I said already, but if I didn't, yes, you can vote for more than one answer. Okay, what are we seeing, Beth? So this folks in West Virginia are seeing the same thing as when we've done these webinars in other states. People, again, almost and always put poorly planned housing, commercial, and industrial development at the top of the list. I think we probably all agree that that is going to be a primary driver. And it's interesting that folks do see that the generational transfer of agricultural land is going to be another driver, and whether there will be a next generation that are able to get onto the land. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the policy response. So thank you all for doing that. Now let's go to the state policy scorecard. And Beth, if you could point out the state policy highlight summary as well. You can just cruise through that while I'm talking here for a minute. Our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address the three main drivers of agricultural land conversion, at least to date. So poorly planned development, weak agricultural viability or profitability in certain sectors of agriculture over certain time periods, and the fact that farmland is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. While AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development around farm and ranch land retention and protection since our founding, this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. And I would say one thing about that. We know that states support agriculture in a number of different ways, and we did not intend this to be a comprehensive scorecard of all of the ways that states support the business of farming, and those might be grants and loan programs, that might be financing through economic development authorities, it might be support for extension. There are any number of ways that states are funding and supporting the business of agriculture. We wanted to focus specifically on those policies and programs that tie directly to the land, and that these policies might have overlapping benefits that are both around protecting land and supporting the business of agriculture, but all of these ones have a clear nexus to the land. So the ones that we looked at, if you can go, oh, right there, Beth, thank you. The programs that we looked at are purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. Many people know these as farmland preservation programs or farmland conservation programs, or purchase of development rights. But all of these are voluntary programs where landowners are willingly selling their development rights to an entity, whether it is a state or county, or in West Virginia, combination of. The second is land use planning and growth management. Again, these are looking at those types of incentives or regulations that a state may have that dictate how local land use planning is done. The third category is property tax relief for agricultural land. Every state in the country has done something to recognize that agricultural land costs less in the services that it requires from a municipality than typically it pays in taxes. So that was the reason for this advent of preferential use assessments or current use or agricultural use assessments. That's what we mean by property tax relief. Agricultural district programs are not in every state. There are about 16 states that have them. They are a way that some states have chosen to put together a bundle of policies that are supportive of agriculture, that might limit annexation. They might provide against nuisance lawsuits. They are, again, voluntary in terms of landowners being part of a district. Then we looked at two policies that were focused a little bit more on, again, trying to get land into the hands of the next generation, and these are state-sponsored farm link programs. We know that there are programs around the country that are run by nonprofits. We think that those programs are doing great work, but we looked here just at ones that were state-supported in some way, because we feel that this approach of trying to link and match farm seekers with landowners and farmers who are looking to transition out of agriculture and want to sell or lease their land and have it stay in agriculture, that there's a huge need for that, to be making that connection. And we think that states should be involved in some way in helping to support those kinds of efforts. And similarly with state leasing, we think that state leasing is an approach that can help to make land that might not otherwise be available to farmers to be offered for leasing for farmers. So that's why it's included in here. So let's go down a little bit, Beth, and see how West Virginia scored relative to other states. So you see exactly at the median for PACE, and having some score, but a little lower than median on both planning and property tax. West Virginia doesn't have an ag district program, doesn't have state-sponsored farm link efforts, and then you see a little bit of points on the state leasing. So let's walk through these quickly in turn. So looking at the PACE program, and you can do that by, you see select policy or programs here, and then the drop-down menu comes up and you select what you want. So we'll look at PACE programs. You'll see here, if we get to West Virginia, that West Virginia has a lot of points for having effective authority for its program and for requiring annual easement monitoring. Where it falls short relative to some other states is the relatively low per capita investment in the program, which then limits the amount of acreage that has been protected. You'll see also that some states get points for provisions that require that protected land remain in agricultural use. So that says provisions promoting ag use and ownership. This is sometimes done through an affirmative covenant to farm that is in an easement deed or through an option to purchase at agricultural value. These two types of provisions are intended to limit the likelihood that the protected land will be sold in the future to a non-farmer at a price far higher than what a farmer would pay or would be able to pay. So that's why we included that in there. I want to stop and mention the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which provides an important source of matching funds for West Virginia farmland protection, as does the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, also a USDA NRCS program. I know that West Virginia has a number of RCPP projects that are focused on farmland protection and would welcome any comments about your experience with RCPP. We hope that the changes made to both programs in the 2018 Farm Bill will continue to improve their utility for farmland protection. And this summer, we will be reaching out through the National Agricultural Land Network to solicit feedback on how these programs are working for partners. So with that, Beth, let's go to land use planning. And I should have said, and we'll do it for land use planning, if you go down to the bottom, if you scroll down to the bottom, you will see how all of the ways that states got points, and that this is intended to explain to people what was included in each one of these factors. And this whole scorecard was weighed in a particular way, and that, again, there's explanations on the website around that. But we hope that these are helpful to help understand sort of how a state was scored and what it has or doesn't have relative to other states. So we understand that land use planning is driven largely at the county and municipal level in West Virginia as elsewhere, and the suite of tools available to those county and local governments to support compact development and protect ag land must be robust. Billy's going to talk about that a little bit later. Our intent with this piece of the scorecard is to look at how every state government is steering or supporting these decisions at the county and local level in a way that supports the agricultural land base. West Virginia gets points for authorizing planning commissions and enabling development of comprehensive plans. States that scored well in this policy support local governments in developing comprehensive plans and require consistency between those comp plans and state goals around compact development and agricultural land protection. So let's go to property tax relief. West Virginia here gets high marks for the percent of land enrolled in its current use or agricultural use assessment program. States that scored higher with this policy have a combination of requirements around active agricultural use for land that is enrolled in current use assessment. And states that scored high also impose withdrawal penalties if a landowner takes enrolled land out of the program within a certain period of time. Some states actually use those withdrawal penalties to help fund their farmland protection efforts. And then lastly, let's look at state leasing. Again, as I mentioned, our intent with doing that is to see what states are doing to promote the use of any state-owned land for agriculture. It appears that West Virginia has the authority to lease state-owned land, but may not be doing that. There may not be much state-owned land suitable for agriculture. I don't know. States that received high scores in this category have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land that could be made available for farming, and then have promoted the use of that land through a transparent application process. We feel that this is an important mechanism for identifying new land access opportunities, especially smaller plot parcels in and near urban areas, and especially for states like West Virginia, where there are, in West Virginia's case, 4 times as many producers over the age of 65 as under the age of 35. I hope that was a helpful cruise through the findings. I suspect there might be questions about them or on the spatial front. If you do have questions or comments, please feel free to write them down now, and we will get to them in a minute. As we go out of the website, we're going to launch a second poll. This one is focused on which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for West Virginia. Again, you can vote for more than one, and my apologies, we didn't have room to have both the state leasing and farm link on there. If you feel that those are important, please just write them in in the question box. That would be great. Okay, Beth. This is, again, very useful to know. The National Agricultural Land Network is going to be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about each of these specific policy elements. And based on the responses here and in other states, again, land use planning has been at the top of the list, so that we will be focusing some additional attention and resources to land use planning and those planning tools, both how can state government be supportive, and then what more can be done at the community level. It's interesting to see that there's an interest among some, obviously, in agricultural districts. I do think it's worth thinking about, because agricultural districts are great in that you can make them what you want them to be in a way that provides support for agriculture, that can be a way to be a kind of entryway into permanent farmland protection. So there are many different ways that you can fashion agricultural districts that might provide a little bit of additional support and effort to keep agriculture land in farming. So let's go to this last slide here. For me, is that the one thing that was missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land. There is not to date a comprehensive national data layer focused on agricultural land protection. We are building this new database now because we feel it is crucially important to know exactly where protected agricultural land, and that's land being protected for agriculture, is located. If you are holding ag easements and you have not heard from American Farmland Trust yet about those easements that you hold, um, please let us know by adding a comment in the question panel and we will be back in touch. I do see some green in West Virginia, so I know that we have gotten data from some of you, but it's possible that we have missed some entities in West Virginia. So if we have missed you, please let us know. So let's pause now and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Chris. There are a couple of questions that I'll answer here. One question is, have the leveled off lands created by mountaintop removal proven viable for agriculture? And so I'm going to provide just a response that's around this data in our report. Overall, American Farmland Trust and the findings from this report supports a comprehensive planning strategy that would target your best PVR land, your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils for the future of agriculture. So you're planning for the future of agriculture. And then each community would need to make a decision based on where its productive farmland is located. And if there are leveled off lands that have been created by mountaintop removal that might be better suited to other uses, such as renewable energy or other economic development uses. But generally, a comprehensive planning strategy should have a goal for protecting farmland that targets your best soils, and your more marginal soils should be used, could be used for other things. The next question is the poor performance of West Virginia on many of the indices a reflection of the state's overall poverty? And I think it's, and for this question, which I saw a bit ago, it's important to focus on the overall economic development around agriculture in West Virginia. So agriculture is nearly, it's a $750 million industry in West Virginia. And you're looking at 38,400 producers and 9,500 farm laborers on 23,600 farms. So it is literally a factory floor for a $750 million economic industry. So I would just say that focusing on the economic development benefits of farmland protection and agriculture as part of an overall economic development strategy, not just in West Virginia, but in any state. So I think we'll move on with the presentation now. And I'll just say that as we move toward this slide, you'll see that time is not on our side in saving our farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that to get to this goal, we will need to lock arms with the many partners and practitioners on this call and others around the United States who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. So on this next slide, I want to go into ways that American Farmland Trust will be strengthening our commitment to farmland protection. So we've talked about establishing the National Agricultural Land Network, providing new leadership in key locations. So American Farmland Trust is letting our data and research inform the parts of the country where there's the greatest need. We have regional offices around the country and plan to open at least 2 more within the next year as a result of these findings. And our goals that you saw earlier will allow us to move forward in each state in material ways, working with our farmers. Protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners. So American Farmland Trust is a land trust. We do hold conservation easements around the country, but usually we don't hold conservation easements where there's a viable entity, a PACE program or a land trust available. So we want to work with our partners, our land trust partners, our PACE and PDR partners to protect more farmland, advocating for stronger state and federal policies. This research can be used by all the folks on this call and our partners across West Virginia to advocate for stronger state and federal policies. American Farmland Trust is a nonpartisan national organization. We have been working in this space for 40 years, and we are a credible convener on these subjects. And we always have a seat at the table because we are providing the science and research about changing policies to protect the land that is sustaining us, and then promoting research-based decision making. So this is really where, and this is a perfect segue for the next slide, research-based decision making. So what more can West Virginia do? So analyze and map agricultural land trends and conditions across the state. Strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. So typically a suite of policies would be communities that have farmland protection goals in their counties that are part of their comprehensive plans, urban growth boundaries so that there is compact contiguous development, and agricultural zoning in rural areas, as well as large lot minimums in rural areas so that we move away from the low density residential lot minimums into viable agricultural units. And of course, farmland protection, either at the local level or the state level. Supporting farm viability and access to land, planning for agriculture, not just around it. And that's focusing on your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils, but also acknowledging that there will be other forms of economic development that we'll need to plan for that's non-agricultural. Saving the best, but don't forget the rest. So we've talked a lot about nationally significant land. We've talked about productive, versatile, and resilient soils, but don't forget the rest. Don't forget the more marginal lands. So next slide.
Okay, so thank you, Billy, for that. We're going to stop for a couple more questions. So if anybody does have questions or comments, please feel free to ask them. There have been a couple of questions and comments about the data for our protected agricultural land data layer. I do not know who our GIS folks have been in touch with in West Virginia, but I will make sure that they are in touch first off with the Ag Land Protection Program, and then if there are county-held easements that don't show up in that state database, we can learn that and reach out accordingly. And yes, we will continue to reach out to land trusts. So if there are land trusts who have not been in touch with us or we have not been in touch with, please let us know that. So I want to talk for a minute about two resources that we hope will be helpful to people on this call. Some of you might already be well aware of the Farmland Information Center. This is something that we have had for more than 20 years. It is a collaboration, longstanding collaboration with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. It is both a website and a technical assistance call center. So, and it is geared not just to practitioners, but also to farmers, ranchers, and landowners. So for that community of folks, we provide information if somebody calls in to say, I want to learn how to protect my land, that we will provide them with information about easements, about tax benefits of easements, about the types of programs that there are out there, and then we will typically, through our directory of land trusts and state and county PACE programs, send them in the direction of the programs in their area. For practitioners, we have a wealth of resources around information around the ASIP ALE program. We are building more of those resources out right now so that what will be available is all of the documents necessary for application and a checklist of things that you need to do as you are applying. These are things that we are working very closely with NRCS on right now. There's also a wealth of statistical information and policy information about types of state policies. Again, I strongly encourage people to take a cruise around the website, which is right there, farmlandinfo.org, for more information. And if you're writing a press release or sending in a proposal and you need a statistic, you can call that number and get that information. So it's a great resource. Turning to the National Agricultural Land Network, this is newly launched as of this year. I know that we have a couple of you from West Virginia who have signed up to be members. We thank you for that. We hope it's going to be a great peer networking and information sharing resource. The intent here is to formalize what we have done for many years, which is to try and provide opportunity for information sharing amongst both state PACE programs and county PACE programs and land trusts that are working on agricultural land specifically to address common challenges. So it's both, we will have programming that is attuned to and responsive to what folks want to talk about. So some of that has been, types of improvements made to particular easements. It might be how you address solar and other renewable energy development on protected land. It might be how do we focus our farmland protection efforts in a way that encourages land access for next generation farmers. It might be about how we focus our work once we have protected land and want to encourage landowners to adopt conservation practices. What's the best way to work with landowners around that? So there's a lot of this programming that is going to happen through the network. I would encourage those who haven't yet signed up to do that. We will be building out that programming, and when we can all get back in person, we will try and have in-person regional events. So I hope that's helpful, and I think, Billy, I will turn it back to you for the last word.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to thank everyone that's joined us on the call today. American Farmland Trust is a national organization that's built on partnerships and collaborations, and we look forward to partnering with everyone on this call and with organizations across West Virginia as we work towards increasing the amount of farmland protected in our nation. And I'll just say generally, I'll touch on the low density residential once more. It's critically important that each county have a goal of protected farmland and they really look at what their lot minimums are. Low density residential is a transition phase towards urbanization. And when you have fragmented rural activities, fragmented farmland, fragmented agricultural activities, it makes it very difficult for ag to move forward in the future. And what we want in our protected land, and I'm glad there are so many land trust partners and farmland protection programs in West Virginia, we want the Holstein. We want large critical masses of farmland to perpetuate agriculture in the future. And we don't want the Dalmatian. We don't want isolated pockets of agriculture surrounded by non-agricultural uses, because it typically makes farming far more difficult. So we are here as a resource. We are happy to work with you. You have seen the website that we have for Farms Under Threat and our Farmland Information Center. For those of you who are have additional questions, I can be reached at bvanpelt@farmland.org. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to connect with you to work with you or to answer additional questions. So thank you all again.
Billy, before I realize that I goofed, we're just going to do it just in case. Still, if people have not left, I completely forgot about our last poll that is intended to help inform the work of the National Ag Land Network. So if you are still on the call and want to weigh in on what type of technical assistance would be most helpful to you, we would really welcome that. So again, I apologize for having forgotten to do this earlier. If anybody wants to weigh in, please do so. Great. I think we will just leave it there, Beth. Appreciate that. Again, thank you all for participating, and have a great afternoon.